Arthur Morgan, the Red Dead Redemption 2 protagonist, a fan favorite. Red Dead Redemption 2 begins just after the Blackwater massacre. At the time, Arthur was 36, and he's already lived a big part of his life, especially back then. And with Arthur's story, we know exactly how it ends, but we don't really understand how it started. And that's what we're going through in today's video. Arthur's story starts all the way back in 1863. This was when he was born. His parents were called Beatrice Morgan and Lyle Morgan, and when he was a child, his mother, Beatrice, died of unknown causes. At this time, his father Lyle was a petty criminal and outlaw. It wasn't long after the death of his mother that Arthur also lost his father too. Not to death, but in 1874, when Arthur was 11 years old, his father was arrested for larceny. It was believed he was witness stealing from townsfolk. Throughout the whole of Red Dead Redemption 2, Arthur never mentions how or when his father died. But what we do know is that Arthur himself did witness his death. He felt close to his father, and he decided to keep his father's hat and a picture of him. For the next 3 years of Arthur's life, aged 11 to 14, he was left homeless, fighting for himself, and during this time, Arthur eventually followed his father's footsteps. He resorted to crime. This would involve stealing from local townsfolk and shops, just like his father used to do. And he was fairly successful at doing this. Whilst throughout these 3 years, he had to live on the streets, he still managed to do enough to survive. However, in 1877, he was witness in the act of the crime. But luckily, it wasn't a lawman. This was Dutch Van der Linde and Hosea Matthews. Dutch and Hosea found Arthur committing a crime on the street. It didn't take long at all for both Dutch and Hosea to see the potential in Arthur at the age of just 14. He already seemed like a complete natural at committing crimes. After all, he did manage to stay out of the sight for the law of 3 years, and the only people to catch him was Dutch and Hosea at that very moment. He likely learnt a few things from his father, but however he learnt it, it worked. Dutch and Hosea took Arthur off the streets. We even have a picture of all three of them together right on those early days of when they did take Arthur off the streets. This is Arthur on the right, Hosea sitting down on the left, and Dutch in the middle behind both of them. It didn't take long for Arthur to see both Hosea and Dutch as father figures. They showed Arthur the life they have been living, free from all constraints of civilization and the rules of law. They taught him how to read, write, hunt, fight, shoot, and ride, all of which became extremely crucial skills for surviving in the 19th century. It's clear to see why it didn't take long for Arthur to view both as father figures. After all, Arthur's father, Lyle, clearly didn't teach him all the necessary skills, leaving him fairly helpless. And just after 2 years with Hosea and Dutch, Arthur became one of the founding members of the Van der Linde gang. The only other important relationship at this time was his companion, Cooper. Cooper was Arthur's dog, and whilst Arthur did have difficulty controlling him at most times, they became close and Arthur admired the dog's spirit. Sadly, Cooper later passed away and Arthur kept a picture of him. Soon later, Arthur acquired his first signature mount, Boudica. This really was the time when things started to really come together for Arthur, because as a young adult, he met a kind girl called Mary Gillis. It didn't take long for them to fall in love and eventually become engaged. He also became really good friends with Mary's younger brother and taught him how to ride a horse. However, Mary's family, particularly her father, disapproved of Arthur's lifestyle full of crime. This led to their relationship falling apart and the couple separating. They did connect later in life, and these are missions as part of Red Dead Redemption 2. But no longer has the name of Gillis, it is instead Linton. Fast forwarding to 1885. Arthur stumbled across a group of homesteaders being cruel to this 12-year-old boy. This 12-year-old boy was John Marston. John was then introduced to Arthur, Dutch, and Hosea and brought into the gang. From this point, both John and Arthur bonded through many crimes and adventures together. They both quickly became son-like figures to both Dutch and Hosea. At around 1890, Arthur met a 19-year-old waitress, Eliza. Arthur slept with Eliza, resulting in her becoming pregnant. She had a boy named Isaac. It was difficult for Arthur to see his son due to his busy lifestyle. Eliza was accepting of this and allowed Arthur to see Isaac every now and then when he would come into town and visit. Every few months that would pass, Arthur would stop round and spend a few days. He would do what he could to support both Isaac and Eliza. And in a conversation with Rain's Fall, he does tell him that this wasn't a life for her. And he understood that, she understood that. But he saw her as a good girl. He didn't want to promise her anything, but he did say he would do right by them. And he did keep his word. But one day, Arthur arrived at their home and he saw two crosses outside. He immediately realized what had happened. They had both died. He later learned that they had been shot and killed by robbers for just $10. And he can never really cope with the pain. He started feeling that by living the life of an outlaw, good things won't necessarily come. Just like most parents, it was difficult for him to overcome this. In fact, he probably never did. He bottled up his emotions, never opened up or spoke to anyone within the gang. The only time which is ever noted down or even acknowledged when Arthur does speak about both Isaac and Eliza is with Rain's Fall many years later. With what happened to Arthur, it made what happened next feel even more of a deeper betrayal. Because John Marston fell in love with Abigail Roberts and they had a son named Jack in 1894. Arthur didn't feel betrayed by this, in fact he was happy. But he did feel a deep betrayal once John refused to have responsibility for Jack, leading to him eventually leaving the Van der Linde gang. Now for John's point of view, he had a lot of difficulties connecting with his son due to doubts of whether or not he was actually Jack's biological father, as well as fears of whether or not he had the ability to raise him. This all happened around 1896, and John left the gang for a year. When he did decide to return in 1897, his return was met well with Dutch and certain other members, whilst Arthur still felt betrayed by his actions. Of course, this relationship was built again from the ground up, but Arthur was still deeply hurt. He couldn't believe that from the age of 12, his partner in crime just left him. But he also couldn't forgive that he didn't have that opportunity. Arthur lost his son Isaac and could never come back. In some ways, Arthur would do anything to see him again, and here you have John who's walking away from something that he really should be grateful for, especially in the life that they have. During all of this, Arthur took up a new activity of fishing, and this helped relieve him from all the pain inside from his past tragic events. And he definitely saw himself as an uncle to Jack and happily took him along, and continued to do so through the events of Red Dead Redemption 2. And this takes us all the way up to May 1899, during a robbery on a nearby ferry. According to accounts of the incident, the ferry was carrying $150,000 of bank money. Dutch saw this as an opportunity and decided to rob the ferry. He was also encouraged to pursue this by Micah Bell. Despite the absence of two senior members of the gang, Arthur and Hosea, who had their own lead, the remainder of the outlaw gang proceeded with the robbery. From what we can piece together, according to Javier Escuela, the heist got off to a really good start, with the gang accessing the money fairly easily. However, the Pinktons soon swarmed the area, along with the police, forcing the outlaws into an unwinnable gunfight. Now, we don't know the exact events of what happened during this. All we know is that it is referred to as the Blackwater Massacre. And Arthur and Hosea did go into Blackwater to try and save the gang members. We know this because Javier states that by the time the boys showed up on the other side of town, we were only just holding on. The boys indicating Arthur and Hosea, which managed to bow out the gang members from what was happening within Blackwater with the Pinkertons and the lawmen. The rest of Arthur's story, well, I'm pretty sure you all know it by now. Arthur's early life may not seem positive at all, but Arthur did have some very precious moments, from meeting Dutch, meeting Hosea, falling in love with Mary, and having a child with Eliza. Arthur did go through a lot of pain and suffering, and this carried on throughout the rest of his life. And despite all of this pain, he never made it obvious. He dealt with it himself and bottled it up. One thing is for certain, he may have lived a life full of crime and conflict, but Arthur was a good man in the end, especially towards others who he thought had good intentions. And he ultimately died for his sins, but also to give others a second chance.